I grew up on a farm as a child of a farm worker.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, so, and the farm workers always tease me when I tell them. So I've stopped telling them because they tease me too much. When you are fair and you're a grown up on the farm, a child of a farm worker, then they tell you that you were born or created during the milk run.
Milk run.
The milk run is when it's early in the morning and the men are, our farm men are out of the house and there is an abuse of the women. So they would tease in that way because of the fair skin. You understand the story?
I understand the story.
But I don't, it's just teasing.
It's teasing.
Mm.
Moshe, tell me what you do in South Africa.
So at the moment, my name is Moshe Andrews and I work as a director of a very old rural NGO. It's a national NGO. The NGO is very interesting because it was founded by a very important South African called Steve Biko. Steve Biko, as you know, was assassinated during the 70s. And the TCOE is the legacy of that organization. So over the years, the organization has changed somewhat, but now it focuses mainly on rural, the land and agrarian question. Hence, we work with farm workers like Kasau. We work with other farm workers that are not members of Kasau yet in other parts of the country. We have farm worker forums that we've established. And then we work with small-scale farmers to access land and to help them to develop livelihoods. So big focus on agroecology and alternatives like that. And then with rural women, so that they can begin to challenge some of the patriarchal relations that's very linked to how land is redistributed and so on. That's my everyday work.
Tell me, how is it to be a woman on South African farms?
It's very difficult. It depends. You mean obviously a farm worker woman, yes. So farm worker women don't have access, they don't have security of tenure in their own name. So you cannot be a farm worker woman, single, and have the house that you live in. You cannot have that contract with a farmer, the farm owner. You have to be married, you have to either live with your family, etc. But as a single woman, you do not have security of tenure to the house. This is despite the law. So even though the law says that you cannot discriminate between males and females, the law on the farms restrict women's access. That's the first issue. Second issue is that women have less skilled work on the farm. They do much more menial jobs. And then another important aspect is that women don't often have enough access to facilities. So if you want to go to the bathroom, there are no bathrooms and toilets in the vineyard. So if you're a man, you can just stand under a tree and you can use the tree as your toilet. Whereas if you're a woman, the situation is much more difficult and so on. So that's a very big issue for women. They often complain about it. There's no access to facilities if you are menstruating to sort out your life and so on, or to wash your hands. Maternity leave is another big issue. There isn't, very few women have access to maternity leave. And also the question of health access to decent health facilities and healthcare and so on is another issue. So women's general working conditions are much more precarious than a male farm worker.
So, how did you get to start with working with the Kosawu in the first place?
So, outside of being a director of an NGO, I am also a political activist, and I've been a political activist all my life. So, in the last period during the change in South Africa, I have started to work with Trevor and Carol in politics in South Africa. And in the last few years, there's been a new formation called the United Front. And this was an attempt to rebuild civil society structures and so on. And that's how we came across each other. And then we started to meet each other also in the rural areas. And I proposed that we meet and look at how we can assist, because there is a very big need for farm workers to be organized, etc. So that's how the collaboration started in about 2010, 11. So it's a good few years ago now. Yeah.
What does the Kosawu mean for the farm workers? What's the significance of the union?
I think it's very important to have a Kosawu. It's significant in that it helps to give workers a sense of security, a sense of protection. During the farm worker strike, for example, the rebellion, there was a very big, important rebellion in recent years, 2012 to 2013. Farm workers organized themselves and took up the challenges on the farms. And for me, what was significant about that rebellion was that people did not, in the first instance, demand an increase in wages. It was a big issue, 150 Rand a day, but the most important thing that they demanded was their dignity. We want to work and live a life of dignity on the farms. So being part of Kosawu has meant that we've, in the last period, been able to introduce educational programs, shop steward councils. We're organizing women's meetings. Every year we've now introduced what we call a farm worker assembly, where we bring the members and we organize it in a family day where children can come, and we celebrate just being organized. So it's small things that we are doing, but we're trying to create a sense of being, valuing organization, being part of a family, being part of a community. And I think this is some of what Kosawu actually means. We've started to introduce quite a number of other little things. For example, a food bank. A food bank is a small thing where workers on a monthly basis, farm workers in the different districts, bring a tin of tinned beans or tinned fish or whatever and put it in the food bank. So that if families are evicted or if they are unemployed, etc., we can give, Kosawu can give those families food as part of a food bank. So it's a small thing, but it helps to give a sense of solidarity. we've initiated a second-hand clothing shop. And it's little, but at all our meetings we try and have this clothing shop and book exchange, so that we're giving people a kind of alternative economy, an economy that they can be part of, that they can afford, and things like that. Back to school campaign is another important part of what we've done as Kasau. A very important victory was last year in one district. I don't know if you met Denico Dube, who one of the shop stewards who came and toured Denmark last year. Anyway, in this district, young children from 7 to about 12 had to walk between 10 kilometers and 17 kilometers a day, one way to school and back. So in winter months, it was terrible for these kids to walk to school and to get to school. So we saw a pattern of kids dropping out of school. And then we discussed, as all of us, and what can we do? So there were some petitions to the farm owners, can you get a bus? We wrote letters to the education department, can you transport these kids? And we didn't get any response. Then we decided during the peak of the fruit picking season, now is the time that we would put this demand for a bus back on the agenda. And so we said, can you transport the children to school every day? If you don't, we are not going to pick fruit. And Kasau members in this district downed tools for 3 days, and on the 4th day we had the bus. So small victories, these are not the grand narratives, but they have played an important role in making the members of Kasau feel that it can add value to their lives.
Do you see a lot of racism on the farms?
Yes. There is, I think that farm workers, our South Africans and rural people in particular have been very dehumanized. Their dignity has been taken away, and so to overcome this, our history, our legacy, I think is going to take a few more decades. And some of it is, I look at myself, I'm the first generation of my family that went to university. And that issue of education has meant that it's given me a bigger sense of the history, and it's given me a lot more confidence. And I'm also an activist, so a combination of things give you confidence to deal with inequalities and racism and so on. So I will go to the farm, I'll press the button, and I will say, I'm coming to see you. And they don't know what I am or how I'm classified or so on. So they would often be more polite to me in the first few minutes of the conversation. Whereas with my colleagues who are not as fair as I am, the tensions, what do you want? You know, who gave you permission? The hostility is greater. And so I think if you look at a town where Kasau organizes, many of the towns, most farm workers have not been, even on the farm, there may be a restaurant where you can taste wine or buy wine and sit Most of them have never been in those restaurants, have never sat in the restaurants. And racism is, the laws are not in place, but the attitudes and the separation continues. The spatial apartheid is there. So we live in the same areas, the same townships, the same shack areas that we've always lived in. And only the middle classes can move out, can go to university, and can live in a way that could bridge and overcome the apartheid divides.
Do you think all of the international attention that Kosovo gets now, do you think that will strengthen the union?
I think it will make, it will strengthen us, and it will create a kind of sense of hesitancy. I think that's a word. They will be more hesitant. Some of the farmers will be more hesitant in how they're going to treat us. They will be more cautious. And that, I think, is going to be quite important. And the more pressure we put, I think the more we can transform the sector. So small things, I think you've heard a lot of this in the last period, where the toilets are still separate. You do not have on some of these distilleries or the farms one toilet system for everybody. You still have a separation of the toilets and how we relate, and the more remote the farm, the more out of the limelight of the public domain the farm, the worse the situation. So sometimes we would say, because I also work...
Toilets are separated by skin color? Or?
Yes, toilets are still separated by skin color, yeah. Yeah. So in Robertson Winery, one of the big issues that workers raised was the fact that there is a continued separation in wages between white workers and black workers. There was a clocking system for black workers, and white workers didn't have a clocking system. So these things are still there, yeah.